Donald Trump upset, you can say, the military industrial complex, you can say the typical position or bipartisan consensus with the standpoint of war, upset that apple cart when he came out saying he was going to withdraw troops from Syria. Now, lefties and even people on the right praised this, saying, yes, this is awesome, great idea. We've been at war for what, 16 years, bring our troops home. They're not serving our interests. Yes, from the standpoint of the weapons manufacturers who are supporting these wars, yes, it's serving their interests pretty well. But I'm talking about us, the American people ourselves. It is not serving our interests. We are creating our monsters. Donald Trump was not wrong in saying that we need to pull back. It doesn't necessarily mean, from the standpoint of Trump anyway, from a right-winger, that they don't have any influence over those areas. Many of those people are our allies in this case, meaning the people who we pay in the various regions that allow us access to the various military bases. But it's still a good thing. I mean, this idea, even the consciousness of it, it's good. We're pulling back. The American, where the troops are coming home. Donald Trump comes out and says he's leaving 400 troops in Syria. I was watching this earlier today while I was sitting at, not today, yesterday. 400 troops are staying in Syria. I see another press conference where Trump comes out and says, look at my map, and he's holding a little map, and he says, by tonight, ISIS is going to be gone. Okay. The part I'm more interested in and enamored by is the 400 troops being left in Syria. Great. I suppose that's better than how many ever thousands that was there, but 400. No one ever asked this very basic question. How? How are you leaving 400 troops in someone else's country? They don't want you in their country. You were, in many respects, the reason why the country went to pot in the first place. There is, if the goal and the purpose of the United States is, as stated, this thing of fighting terrorism, there is nothing there that requires your presence that the actual owners of that country can't deal with the help of their allies. I guess I'm making this point that what is the United States using in order to leave troops in somebody else's country, and a country that doesn't want them there in the first place? I mean, come on, this is somewhat problematic. We are not good guys here. We are not the angels in this particular story. We're not the protagonists. Take a look at this. There were situations where elements pushed by the CIA were fighting elements pushed by the military. We have been in Syria for years using CIA in order to inflame the tensions that is already within the country itself. Bashar al-Assad is not necessarily the greatest of human beings. You can imagine there will be tension in this society. To play with those fault lines, to dump money and aid and assistance into that country in order to bring that country to a certain degree of chaos. And when that country finally pops, drop weapons into the country, and not just weapons, fighters from the various regions and the lapdogs of the United States, our allies. That's exactly what took place. When Tulsi Gabbard goes on and puts that bill to essentially stop arming terrorists, that's what she's talking about. Jake Tapper and the media knew about it. They just wasn't saying anything about it. When she put Tapper on the spot and brought it up, Tapper seemed to have known about it. He just wasn't going to say. Right here. Don't take my word for it. Behind the sudden death of the $1 billion secret war in Syria. We were not the good guys in this story. We were creating chaos in order to destabilize and undermine that government. Same thing with Libya. Same thing with Iraq. I just want to be clear. With all that being given, if it wasn't for the Russians and the Iranians, the Syrian government would have collapsed. How are we in someone else's country? First question. No one ever asked that question. Second question, what aspect of law are you using to stay in that other person's country? 3, Syria never attacked us. Did anybody even spit in our direction? If they haven't attacked us, if they haven't even so much as spit in our direction, how are we attacking them? And not just how are we attacking them, how are we leaving military assets in their country? The media never asks these questions. And I'm fascinated by this because I think these are the most interesting aspects. Are we a country of laws, or are we a country, in this case, of the imperial president? Meaning, is it a situation where the laws mandate, dictate what the president is doing in this case? Meaning, what is the president allowed to do? Is this being done by law, or is this being done purely by an abdication of authority of Congress in reining in the president's behavior and what the president is doing? And not just an outright abdication of the responsibility of Congress. The president himself, it's not a function of law. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. It's one thing if the president does something, he's compelled to do something because he's required to protect this nation. That's not what's taking place. All of these are wars of aggression. These are things of choice that the president is taking on, not because he's mandated by law, but because he's choosing to do so. There's a difference in those things. Have we just reached the age of the imperial president in which he's just untethered from law, especially in situations where, again, Congress entirely and completely advocates its responsibility to rein the president in? Whether Trump is keeping 200 troops in Syria or not, who knows? I have no idea. There's no way to know. We're not in Syria. It may be true. It may be false. It may be somewhere in between. Either way, you're stuck with this kind of thing of belief. You have to kind of believe what's coming out. My question is getting more to the heart of the United States foreign policy, and whether or not there is some kind of international standard that allows the United States to invade another person's country, whether there's our own legal standard that allows us to invade somebody else's country and install troops in their country, or is the president, again, just untethered from law? I suspect to some degree this goes back to George Bush. Why does this go back to George Bush? George Bush, under Richard Nixon, Nixon was going to be prosecuted. He was pardoned. I guess you could say of Reagan, in this case, maybe it goes back to Reagan, the Iran-Contra affair. There was no consequences for what Reagan did in this case. George W. Bush takes the brinksmanship up that much more, daring the country to indict him for war crimes, or for the matter of allying the country into a war. I mean, ultimately, you have 1 million deaths on his hands. No consequence. He goes home, he's finger painting in his footy pajamas. So what does that mean for the next president, meaning be it Obama or Trump, when the other president hasn't been prosecuted for the crimes that he committed? And understand what I mean by this. The thing where this wasn't prosecuted, at this point it just becomes, it's almost like a de facto default of the presidency and what's allowed within the presidency. And what that essentially means is the president can declare war and invade country whenever the president wants. Congress is not going to hold him accountable, so the president, for the most part, is untethered from law. This ability to put troops in Syria in this way is indicative of just that particular thing. Who needs laws? This is just a matter of choice. The country, the media, just kind of assumes that it's okay for America to do this, and so it kind of goes along with that way. I would put to you, and this video is going longer than I wanted, but I would put to you just basic questions. Under what authority is the president putting our troops in somebody else's country? Under what international authority is the president doing this? I'm making the point that it's illegal to do this. Has Syria attacked us? If Syria hasn't attacked us, is Syria really our enemy? Basic questions. Media never asks these questions. Basic questions. Especially if you're looking from the standpoint of we need to cut back on these wars and these interventionist policies that we've been taking around the globe and reinvest that money back into domestic programs. There needs to be a new way of looking at the military. Also, there's a secondary question of, do we really want people leveraging their bravery in order to overturn other governments. It's time for us to change our policies. Media doesn't help in this regard. It's time for us to start looking at this in a different way. Krillin 876. Why does mainstream media always stress that Assad, etc., attacked his own people as if that makes it okay to attack a neighboring country? What the fuck? It's the same reason it's okay to kill a Nazi or to punch a Nazi. That ultimately he's so bad and he's so horrible that whatever happens to him is fair game. That thing in your head that says it's justice. You know, it's like this guy steals a purse from an old woman, runs, trips up, lands on his face. The thing lights off in your head. Good. He got his just desserts. This thought that if Assad is a horrible guy, a horrible, bad, disgusting guy, and he's doing these horrible things to his own people, then it makes it okay for us to do bad things to Assad. Meaning it makes us okay to invade that country as if Assad is the totality of the country itself. And that invasion of the country doesn't necessarily mean killing a lot of people in order to get to Assad. This idea that we're doing some kind of humanitarian assistance in the process of killing and murdering a large number of people. I mean, that's essentially what takes place. We always make this argument as if Saddam, as if Iraq wasn't made up of other areas of governments, as if it wasn't an actual government, just like our government is a government. Different in tenor, yes, but a government nonetheless. They do the same thing with Assad. If you can show he's a horrible person, then it makes it okay in people's heads, particularly in a militaristic culture, that it's okay if you give them a little bit of freedom. That's the reason they do it. It's in order to, you know, it makes that cognitive okay. Even though it's like, oh man, I don't like the military, you know, invading stuff, but he's a bad guy and the people will be better off. That's the argument. That's the reason why they make the argument and frame it in those terms. Yeah, it's gross. There is no I in preposterous. I love that. Anna West Trump is Obama. Garnum. This is being driven by decades-old policies around resource control. Some call it Kissinger doctrine. Yes, putting these policies in the office of the president gets us nowhere. Garden, I agree with you, man. I mean, honestly, I agree with you. I mean, I would say definitely goes back to, what is it, the plan of to renovate America or something like that, or to renovate America's military, where they were actively talking about reshaping the Middle East with a certain degree of American might to do so. This kind of restructuring. And this goes with this thing of tackling, 7 countries in X number of years. It seems that they've stuck to that schedule. Whether that's to have some level of resource dominance, like, you know, getting their hands on oil, or whether that's taking down those other governments that were puppet regimes of the Soviet Union. However, you know, you get to that point, they are trying to take down those governments. They have. They failed in this case, but they succeeded in the case of Libya. So yeah. How do you feel about your BPY, I don't know what that is, Nernone, burn coming out as McCain's boo? Look, man, I can't co-sign everything Sanders does, man. He's in a political thing. He's in a political context. So I'm gonna let Sanders do Sanders. There's no preposterous. Anna West, what do Reagan, Bush's, Clinton, and Obama's all have in common? What, you mean the Imperial presidency? I don't know. I mean, all of them, for the most part, were Republicans, if you want to put it that way. They were all worst presidents ever. So is Trump. See, that's just it. Like, when you get into this thing of comparing presidents like Trump, Obama, Clinton, that type of thing, Obama did something that he should get credit for. He broke this kind of public consciousness with this idea of Medicare or healthcare. Republicans called Obamacare government-run healthcare for so long um, that it clearly wasn't government-run healthcare. It was kind of this takeover of healthcare. But it made the public realize that we could do this, that this wasn't something that was overly taboo. It was overly taboo only because it was overly taboo. If we as a public, as a country, decided that we were going to make sure everybody had healthcare, we can make sure everyone had healthcare. This came to fruition in a bit more clarity when Donald Trump comes out with Trump Care, and people see the comparison between the two ideological differences. Yes, this neoliberal utopianism of Obamacare, that we can essentially keep these healthcare companies as leeches within the system itself, while simultaneously making sure people have, good quality healthcare at a low cost. Well, that didn't necessarily go that well. And Trump, Jesus Christ, I can't say it, in a similar ideological way, but in his case, based on campaign promises. He says, I want to get rid of Obamacare. Okay, that's what he tried to do. He didn't necessarily care about the chaos that was going to be caused by getting rid of Obamacare. And finally, people come to this thing of Medicare for all, where it's not this ideologically driven healthcare from either a neoliberal or, in this case, or just kind of a repugnant Republican. It's looking around the world and what has been the way that people have been able to provide healthcare for all of the people in their society, high quality, at the best price. And you get something like Medicare for all. MacArthur, Louisiana. Andrew Yang 2020. So let me talk about Andrew Yang for a moment. Now I ended on this. My mouth is so dry. One of my subscribers asked me why I was covering Andrew Yang, and didn't particularly like Andrew Yang's universal basic income idea. The reason I'm covering Andrew Yang is not because I want Andrew Yang to win. Understand what I mean? My horse is Bernie Sanders in this case. I support Tulsi Gabbard, because I want her on the debate stage. But Yang, in this case, is somewhat of a mixed bag for me. I don't know if Yang is going to be used as a weapon in order to undermine Sanders from the left, meaning in order to pull votes from people who would typically go to Sanders but get enamored by Yang's universal basic income idea. By the same token, my objective in doing this channel is not to just be status quo in perpetuity. I want to get things changed. I want things to be different. I want to get to a new normal in which people have a better life. No, it's not going to be utopia, but at the very least, a tick better on whatever that particular scale is. That's what I want. That's my goal. In order to get to that goal, I need people in the same way that they're, it's kind of tweaking their consciousness with Obamacare, where they realize, oh yeah, we can do this. Healthcare shouldn't be taboo. It's something that we as a society can actually do something on. And no, Obamacare wasn't great or perfect, but what's coming after it, as a public getting accustomed to it, will be much better. My thinking is something like that with Yang. But in this case, not looking at the capitalistic system as something that you just exist in, kind of like as a fish in water, not recognizing the water, or that the fish thinking the water is just the natural property of existence in the universe itself, as opposed to just being an element, compound, I'm sorry. I need people to start looking at the capitalistic system as a system. Like, not, I'm going and buy, whatever you're buying, cheese and ham, and you go and you play your Xbox and you buy your video games and you buy your Amazon stuff. Not in those just direct moment-to-moment terms. I want people to start looking at it as a larger, overarching system to which they exist in. These agreements that they accept, that allow a structure of sorts to take place, that we all at this point exist in. It's somewhat of a religious belief, but it's one that we've been able to, you can say, keep going for the past, X number of centuries. In this very specific case, however, Yang approaches this as a system. He looks at this as, look, this system has hit the bricks. It's hit the skids. It's incapable of dealing with an aspect of it, and creating chaos within the society itself. That problem, that inequality that's being driven into society is only going to get worse if nothing is done. The system is somewhat unsustainable in the way that the system is going, and it's going to collapse. And this is going to be a hellscape if we don't do something about it. First and foremost, it's not so much that the UBI is the panacea. It solves all of the issues in the society. That's not it. My issue with Yang is that he's focusing on it as a system. And in focusing on it as a system, I want the rest of the public to also focus it in those ways. Even if they don't come to that conclusion, I'm less caring about whether or not they come to that specific conclusion that Yang is coming up with, in as much as them, at the very least, acknowledging that this is a system. That's all it is. There are a series of agreements that we take on. This is not an act of God. This is an act of man, choice. We make certain choices in our society that picks winners and losers. And all of the economic might that translates into political muscle has been weighed in one very specific direction that has inexorably led us to where we are now, with a capitalistic system that has done an excellent job in creating wealth. However, allocating it to the top 1%. And this problem is only going to get worse as automation gets more and more prevalent. And by the way, it will. Yang makes this point, I think he said in 20 years or something, a fourth of the jobs are going to be gone for the service sectors. I mean, some of the stuff is amazing. Well, the malls are going to start closing and everything else. I like the fact that he looks at it as a system. His solution to this is less relevant to me. I like the universal basic income idea, but that's less relevant to me than the fact that people look at it as a system. So that's my reasoning for Yang, or the reason why I want Yang on the debate stage. I want that pushed out to the masses for people to hear it over and over and over and over again. This is a system. This is a system. This is a system. And as any other system, it can be changed. We can make this better. We can turn the system to something different. We can do better than capitalism, as Richard Wolff says. Just saying. I've invited Andrew Yang on the show. Should billionaires be illegal? Yes. Yes, billionaires should be illegal, if you're asking me. The job of our society is not to make billionaires. And understand, from the standpoint of us, it is impossible for a billionaire to exist without us. Meaning, there is no me without you. There is no us. I said that weird. There is no billionaire without people to make them billionaires. Meaning, an individual has to buy their product, or an individual has to work at their stores. In either case, they're entirely and totally dependent on human labor. Even outside the context of just their individual store. The guy who fights the fires, the guy who polices their area, the guy who sweeps their streets, the guy who makes sure the road stays intact. All of these things are crucial to have a certain degree of society and environment. And all of them are necessary for him to be a billionaire. There is no Jeff Bezos without the postal workers. There is no Jeff Bezos without streets for those postal workers to drive on. There is no Jeff Bezos without people working at those factories, without people buying their products. I'm trying to make this point to you that we are inextricably linked within a capitalistic system where there is no capitalist or top person without the people at the bottom. And if that's true, which that is true, then this notion that one sector of the society should do magnificently well at the expense of the other should be nonsense. At a deeper level than this, we are linked. We are united. It is impossible for one to exist in the other. This is, am I my brother's keeper type things. Yes, the money should be diverted. There should not be a situation where there's somebody who's a billionaire and somebody else is sleeping on the street, especially when those billionaires are entirely dependent on the rest of society. I hope that argument makes sense. I'm trying to make this point that The fact that they are dependent on us for their existence, nobody in the society should suffer or struggle to get access to their needs, nor should the society itself be held back in this case, meaning not having enough money to do whatever they need to do, be it Hyperloop or high-speed rail or whatever else. Seeing as that billionaire needs us. I hope that makes sense. It's like they're entirely dependent upon us. If they're dependent upon us, why on earth do you have a society where so much of the resources get sucked up into the hands of so few people? I mean, think of what is taking place. We're 20-something trillion, $23 trillion in debt. We don't have high-speed rail. Many of the bridges and roads are crumbling. Some of the water in the country itself has lead in it or is of low quality. You have shanty towns in some areas, or these kind of areas where you have these homeless districts. I guess I'm trying to get across, it shouldn't be this way for the richest country on the planet. The richest country that ever existed. It should not be this way. My point here, though, is this is not an act of God. This is an act of man. This is an act of policy, and that policy can be changed. Some of this has to do with how we conceive ourselves, right? This idea that, well, they need us for them to be billionaires. At the deeper level of our society, they require us for their very existence. If that is true, which of course that's true, then the individual should look at themselves and say, it is unfair that they are able to hoard this much, seeing as their lifestyle is entirely powered by us. Workers, individuals within the society needs to have a different consciousness in the way that they themselves in relation to billionaires and millionaires within the society itself. They are utterly dependent upon us, and we need to be very clear on that before we just automatically give so much of the wealth and resources of the society over. Just saying. All right, I'm going to end this. Let's see, wait. Cool Blue. Jamarl, thank you for your video. David Sirota smeared by the Atlantic and Washington Post with a fake story. I will watch it tonight. Important topic. Yeah, they put a knife in Sirota. The Atlantic ran a story. If you, just in case people don't know what I'm talking about, David Sirota is working with Bernie Sanders now. David Sirota left his job and as a writer, and then went to the Sanders campaign, or started to kind of shadow advise the Sanders campaign, but eventually starts to get brought on. At no point was he a double agent, meaning he wasn't working for his organization, I think it was The Guardian, while simultaneously working for Sanders. He left one job in order to go into the other job. The Atlantic ran a story saying that he was a double agent, that he was essentially attacking Clinton supporters or attacking other Democrats while working with Sanders, but not disclosing the fact that he was working with Sanders as he was with the newspaper. The gentleman at The Guardian pointed out that if the Atlantic would have contacted him, he would have told him that the story is patently false. That is not what took place at all. The last story that Sirota wrote was in December. He didn't start working with Sanders until later in January. Another source comes out from the Sanders campaign, says something similar with the dates being slightly askew, but for the most part it's the same difference. There's a month between the times these two people start working together. The assumption here, I would imagine, is that looking at Sirota's stories, they may see them not liking Clinton supporters or not liking other Democrats. That's not unique with Sirota. That's, for the most part, a large body of us that have seemed to have become something else. Something that's not quite one of the other parties. Something that's unique and distinct amongst ourselves. And it seems to be a group and a body and a community of us that interact with one another. Sirota is just an aspect of that. I would say Sirota, Aaron Matei, Katie Halper, Dorr. There are few people who fit into this mindset. Now, Max Blumenthal, Ben Norden, you can run the gambit. I guess I'm making the point that this has become somewhat of a community. It is not atypical of members of this community to berate other Democrats I do it myself quite often. It makes me feel like a man to some degree. I guess my point is this. David Sirota writing bad things about Democrats has nothing to do with him being associated with the Bernie Sanders campaign. It has everything to do with him just being, this is his political ideology. Tapping him in order to come working with him also makes sense because, again, this is within the context of his own ideology. They're of like mine on this. Not to mention he worked for him in the past. They accused him of something that was a complete lie. That story fell apart almost immediately. It didn't stop the Washington Post from running with the story, however. A story that, again, was patently false. So yeah, just saying. Just saying. All right. I am going to end this. I may have another one. We'll see. Bob Romero said UBI creates a permanent underclass, almost impossible to escape. So Bob, I'm trying to get Richard Wolff to come back on the show. I think I fucked up my relationship with Richard Wolff. It's not a sexual relationship. He's never touched me inappropriately or anything. But I asked him to come onto the show once before. I think it's like 15 minutes. And Richard Wolff answered the very first question was like 15 minutes. And I wanted to still get those other two questions in. The interview ended up being like 30, 45 minutes. In which case, I think it kind of soured him on it. I think he thought I was being disingenuous. So I sent him an email apologizing profusely and asking him about the universal basic income question. I don't know if I agree that it creates a permanent underclass, Bob. It's two things that I think come in conflict with one another, like contradictions. Is it a situation where the people who receive the money are freed from a certain degree of vulnerability? Like, and in that freedom from that vulnerability, they have the opportunity to do other things. Like, so this person doesn't have to work at this crummy job that they absolutely hate and they want to shoot themselves because they work at this job. And instead, maybe they do a channel. And maybe in doing on YouTube, the $1,000 is just enough to help them to get by, in which case that gets converted into something else. Like, I guess I'm making the point that the money, in some degree, may allow people to do what they want to actually do as opposed to being forced into doing it. There is no such thing as this kind of equal exchange or I'm saying this in a poor way, but your needs force you into labor. And in being forced into labor in this way, you have to do something. Oftentimes people end up in jobs that they absolutely hate. They got to make ends meet. You have a kid to feed. You have to feed. You have to feed yourself. You have to keep the roof on the house. You have to do all of these things. What happens when those people are freed from that? At least, not necessarily the amount that they get is going to completely absolve them of this stuff. But at the very least, it gives some people the opportunity to break free from this kind of toil where they were stuck. And for other people, it gets rid of the vulnerability. Do those people start looking into other things like politics? Especially if you start talking about removing that money, kind of like taking Social Security away or Medicare away. Do those people start looking at larger issues? For instance, climate change. At the point where their immediate needs aren't, they aren't in danger of losing their immediate needs or going hungry. Do those people start looking at the large community and say, you know what, we really need to do something about climate change because this planet is not going to be here forever if we keep fucking around, or we're not going to be here on this planet? That's the first question. Well, the second question is, do you need the contradictions in order to push people forward? Meaning, if the people are in a situation where that vulnerability has been edged off to some degree, that you've sawed down the edges of vulnerability within society by giving people a certain amount of money in order to kind of make their way. Does that cut down on, you can say, the revolutionary energy, that drive, that push, that chaos and that problems push the society forward? For example, our society right now, the election of Donald Trump as opposed to the election of Hillary Clinton. What would 2020 look like if Hillary Clinton was in office as opposed to Donald Trump being in office? I guarantee you this: conversations on reparations, conversations on Medicare for all, conversations on the Green New Deal, none of that stuff will be on the table. Anti-war, none of it will be on the table. The chaos itself created a space, this kind of interregnum, for a new shift of the Overton window, a new change, a new way of being. The question becomes, does it settle, and is it something that is persistent? Meaning, is it something that's fly by night, in which case the old normal comes back into application, normal in the sense of the last, let's say, 10 years? Or is it different? Or is it different? I mean, that's ultimately the question that we're dealing with. It should be interesting. I don't know which one it is, Bob. Like, I don't know if it's one of those things of, you're right, it creates an underclass because people at the point where they get the money don't have the revolutionary drive in order to change their situation, in which case you have a perpetual capitalistic hellscape where you have a permanent upper class and you have a permanent bottom class essentially sucking on the tit. Or, once you get rid of the vulnerability of people within the society itself, those people start looking to do new and more creative things. I suppose it's probably going to be a little bit of both. I just don't know which one it's more of. I hope that makes sense. I'm being wordy. UBI is inevitable if all Americans want to continue to be capitalists. If you don't turn the UBI, then the system will collapse. Victoria Lawless, that is a good point, Jamal. Everyone would just be working towards the same neoliberal points and re-electing Clinton had she sworn it. Yeah. Yeah. If Clinton was elected, none of this comes up. They're not going to primary Clinton. That's the first point. And this scare of Trump potentially getting elected, here's the other catch. Trump is going to be used as a boogeyman from here on out. In perpetuity in Democratic politics, Donald Trump is going to be used as a boogeyman in order to try to corral people into voting in a particular block. The hope here is that there's a shift in the party, that the party fundamentally changes, in which case the boogeyman that Donald Trump is using is not to hit lefties, but to hit neo-libs. They hit the corporate Democrats and get them to fall in line. Hey, you don't want another Donald Trump, do you? I am talking about a hegemonic shift in what it means to be part of the Democratic Party. I don't see that happening if it's not Sanders. I'm just saying. I don't see it happening if it's not Sanders. Actual policies under Hillary will be similar, but the national convo will be very different. That's the wild part about it, right? Like, this notion that these guys are so different, but there would be a tax cut. It just wouldn't be as gross. Hillary Clinton was doing similar things to Obama or said similar things than Obama in regards to immigration. So yeah, that's still going to be taking place, but again, maybe not to the degree it's gross. The judges of the Supreme Court, that part would be different. Maybe. It depends on whether or not the Republicans would have allowed those picks to go through, or if they were saying, like before, well, just going to let the presidency die on the vine. Nobody's saying that we need the Supreme Court. We're going to let the Supreme Court die on the vine. The environmental policies, Hillary Clinton was selling fracking all over the world, so whatever Donald Trump is doing from the standpoint of the environment and standpoint of oil, do you honestly believe Hillary Clinton put through any kind of policy that was going to be substantial in dealing with the crisis of climate catastrophe? The answer is no. And if that answer is no, then whatever Donald Trump is doing, even if he says it doesn't exist, doesn't necessarily get you that far along when you're going to hit the wall anyway. It's like, oh, we've shaved 20 miles per hour off the wall. Off the speed that we're traveling, to which we're going to hit the wall. So we're going to hit it at 70 miles an hour as opposed to 90 miles an hour. You're dead just the same. It becomes this thing of change. What has the higher change potential or the higher chance of forcing a change within the system itself. My argument was that between the two, Donald Trump gave you the best bang for your buck with the potential of change. With this downside that there's a potential risk that he's a fucking lunatic. But your society can't keep going this way. And if the society can't keep going this way, and if status quo is this kind of deadening status quo, is if the people are rebelling against status quo, there's no point in having more of it. Trump was a chance or opportunity to get something different. And with all the subjects and the conversations that are taking place from the standpoint of the left, it seems that whatever they want to say about the policies and everything else, at least that effect seems to be true. Now, all of this doesn't really matter if, Cory Booker gets elected president of the United States, or if Donald Trump just wins again. If Donald Trump wins again, oh my God. Oh my God. Hillary SCOTUS would have been socially liberal. Yes, that's true. Perhaps, but on the economy and environment, yes, that's also true. I agree with you on that one, Garden. I don't know if she would have been as rapacious as, a Trump person that Donald Trump puts up. But yeah, socially liberal. I mean, they're Democrats. The socially liberal thing seems to be part of the culture at this point. But socially liberal doesn't necessarily do anything about their donors. It doesn't address their donors at all. In fact, it has no threat to their donors. They love this idea of these guys being socially liberal. There's just more people to buy their products. Trudy, I come from a migrant worker class. I know that we've been freed from worry about survival. We, my 9 siblings and I, might have been someone else. Right there, Trudy. That's right there. If you were free from that worry, meaning you got up in the morning, you knew that at the very least you're going to be able to eat. Surely that's a benefit. I mean, surely that's a change in the way that people go about their affairs. I know for myself, my mom struggled constantly. I mean, struggled to feed, to rent, borrowing money from one in order to give to the other, just, repeat the cycle again, never being in this thing of comfort, always being perpetually vulnerable, especially after I got ill. It was to the point where her job was threatening to fire her because she was spending time with me in the hospital. 17-year-old kid. 17-year-old kid. Can you imagine? $1,000 would have been an entire sea change for her. She wouldn't have had to borrow money in the way that she would have borrowed money. We would have made sure, at very least, made sure there was either rent or somewhere to stay. It takes the worry off. That's why I think that's somewhat of a big deal for the UBI. Simultaneously, though, I think you also need the job guarantee. I think you need both. Yeah, Trudy, I agree with you on this. My mom worked for the city. She didn't make much at all. She started working for the city right out of high school. And so they gave her the wage that she was making like when she was in high school. They just bumped it up slightly. So she had been with them for like 30 years and making little to nothing during the time that she was with them for that 30 years. That's struggle, man. I mean, you're raising kids in a society where your parents are in perpetual struggle. This person working in this job, the mom's working at another job, and then the kid is sitting at home. Like, why do we want kids in our society raised in this way? And understanding that the experiences of that kid when that kid is when that kid is young, is gonna reverberate on him throughout the course of his life. There are gonna be things that are etched on him that he don't even remember that is there on somewhat of an emotional level. Why do we want those times to be difficult? Especially when that's going to leave a mark on our society. Yeah, man, that part, it's like, if we have the potential to do something to make people's lives easier, maybe we should consider doing it. By the same token, I accept that threat of a permanent underclass is real. yeah, I don't know. I'm curious about what Richard Wolff is going to say about this if he responds to me. And I would let you guys know immediately if he responds. Hopefully he'll come on to the show, but we'll see. All right, I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone.